Okay, we're going to continue picking up where we sort of left off, and hopefully today, we'll get to understanding how some of this applies to our concept of Pesach, or conceptualization of Pesach and the mitzvahs that we have and what we're doing, hopefully. So we understand now that there's this structure of 10 spheros, and it creates sort of like what we call a coma. It creates a full standing structure. Now, this structure, these 10 spheros, like we mentioned last time, can be broken up in a number of ways and referred to and related to in a number of different ways. Obviously, there's a way to relate to them all as a unit, as one thing, something, and that thing's 10 spheros. Right? Everything in the world is made up of 10 spheros. We're going to get to that, soon to understand that. But there's, that aspect of the 10 spheros. But then, like we said last time, we could always, though, break it up between 3 on the top and 7 on the bottom, because the 3 on the top are the mochin. Those are like the brains, right? The conceptual or potential type of midos, and then we have the zayin tachtonim, the sheva tachtonim. That is something, those are the ones that are more lamaisa. So that's another breakup. Then you could break it up even into 3, right? You have the mochin, and then you have the 6, right? Chesed, Gvur, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus as a third one, right? So that's a breakup of 3, the mochin, and then the maisa, like the action, and then the Yotze Lepoel. Then you have, what the action results in, right? That's another way to break it up, and there's sometimes that it's referred to, the whole structure is referred to in that way. One of the ways in which these 10 are broken up, and this is, a very main theme in a lot of aspects of Kabbalah and Svarim, and it is breaking up the 10 into 5 partsufim, into 5 different, I think we alluded to this last time, mentioned it, but into 5 a partsuf, as opposed to a sphera. A sphera, each sphera has its own characteristic, and like we'll see, certain spheros can be parts of on their own, but like we said, the sphera of Chesed or Gvura or Netzach or Yesod. So on its own, that sphera doesn't have a full hanhaga, a full shlemus to it, right? It plays a part, but those 6 together, Chesed, Gvura, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, all together they comprise a hanhaga shlema. So that makes one partsuf. That's called a partsuf. So we have a way of breaking up the 10 into 5 partsufim, and we're going to focus on this for a little bit, because this is a very important way of understanding these concepts. And this is what I referred to last time as in terms of the construction of a house, right? We have the ratzon. So that's the first step. That would correspond to the idea of keser, or again arich anpin, and that's a very mufshat. It doesn't have any form to it at all. However, it encapsulates or comprises everything that's going to come after it, because the ratzon is what is driving everything. So the ratzon, that's keneged keser or arich anpin, and the idea that that place is the highest place, is what's motivating and moving and driving everything. And like we said, that's the in sefer das Tfunos on Hagas Hayichud, which is constantly running in the background. So that's arich anpin. That's the first parts of. That's called arich anpin, the long face, like we explained last time. The next one we have is chachma. Chachma on its own is also a full partsuf, and this partsuf we call Abba. We call Dad, the father, Abba. And chachma, like we said, is now from the ratzon we go to the idea. In that one idea, in that one conceptual idea in the head now of a house, that follows from that ratzon of a place to live. So all of the house is in that one idea. It's already there, but it's not at all expanded upon. It's very compact, or concentrated. That's Abba. That's Abba, and that's the parts of Chachma, which is also referred to as Abba. Then we have Ima, which we said is like the Adrichalit, the architect, the one who takes that one idea from Chachma and breaks it down and opens it up and expands it and fleshes it out and draws up the plans and makes everything potentially available to be made. That's Ima. right? And like we explained last time, this is, Abba and Ima really are like a father and a mother in the production of a child, right? The father gives over one small bit of koach, and then it's the Ima over 9 months that takes that one cell, two cells together, and then opens it up and structures the entire Vlad, the entire child. But the whole time, it's only in potential. It's on the inside of the woman. It's not. It doesn't have any expression out in the world until the Leda, until the birth happens. So those are the first three partsufim: Aruch, Anpin, Abba, and Ima, which again correspond to the three spheres of Keser, Chochma, and Bina. Okay, now we have the six: Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and that makes altogether Ze'er Anpin. Sometimes referred to as Tiferes, which is like the central Mida and the main Mida of the six. It's sometimes referred to as Ze'er Anpin. This is like we explained last time the bitzua, bringing the ideas into actuality, and we said this could also sort of be broken up into two parts. There's the chesed gvur tiferes, which is like from the side of the mashpia, and then the netzach hod yesod is from the side of the makabel. But all of that together, that is the action. That's zer anpin, and then we have malchus, or now we call this nukva, the parts of the nukva. Zer Ampin is like the Zachar, and Malchus is like the Nukva. This is a very important idea that we're going to see a lot. And Nukva, again, like we said, that's like the Yotze Lepol. That's what happens. That's what the result of this whole process is, and that structure of these five partsufim are a way of organizing the 10 spheros to understand, in each level what's happening. I want to try to explain this in one of the most fundamental metaphors or mashalim that are given. All of these ideas that we have in concepts express themselves in many different ways in the Torah, or through different letters in the Torah, through different names of Hashem in the Torah, through there's all different ways of these concepts expressing themselves. And the Shem Hashem itself, Yud Ke Vav Ke, the Shem Havaya, Yud Ke Vav Ke, is itself a remez to this whole structure. And I want to just go through it with you because it'll hopefully pull things together and explain this, and then we're going to move on to the next idea. But the Yud Ke Vav Ke really again encapsulates the whole structure as follows: Keser, or Arch Anpin. So Keser is a concept of ayin, Aleph Yud Nun, ayin. It's not really here. Because again, the idea of Keser, the Ratzon is so elevated and so high, it doesn't really have actual expression in this world. Its expression comes out through everything that's below it, but the Keser itself, the Aruch Anpin itself, is, like we said, running behind the scenes, the Hanagas HaYichud, but it does not express itself over here in this world, and that's the Kutzo Shel Yud. The Yud, the Os Yud, the halacha of how you write a Yud. So there's, the little letter, and there's a kutz. There's a little bit on the top that goes up, little teeny bit that goes up. The kutzel shel Yud, that represents Keser. That represents the concept of Aruch Anpin. And again, it's barely there. Because Aruch Anpin is not really here, so it doesn't really have a representation over here. The first thing that we have, Chachma me'ayin timotze. Chachma came from nothing, right? Chachma is the next one. That's Abba, the parts of Abba, or the sphere of Chachma, and that's represented by the Os Yud of the Shem Hashem, the Os Yud. And if you think about it, the Yud is just a dot, right? It's just the ink, the dot. That's a Yud. It has no form to it. It has no. I mean, again, we draw it with a form, but the basic halacha, basic concept of a Yud, it's the smallest letter. It has the least structure to it, the least details. That's barely there, right? And that's again the idea of chachma, the idea of the idea, but the idea in a very, very tamtziti form, in a very concentrated form, not at all expanded, not clarified, and in a very, very mirukaz way. That's the Yud of the Shem Hashem. Okay, the Kutzo Shel Yud is Aruch Anpin. The Yud itself represents Chachma, and that again corresponds to this idea that the Yud is concentrated and small. It also corresponds with this idea that the Yud is like a shame of chesed, or the shame of the masculine side, because Chachma is on the right side, which is the side of Chesed, and it's on the masculine side. And we'll see this is something that comes up a lot throughout this limud. The next letter in the Shem Hashem we have is Hey. Now Hey, there's two of them. There's the Hey Ila'ah, or the Hey Rishona. That's the upper Hey, or the first Hey. And there's the Hey Tachtona, or the second Hey, the lower Hey. And the two Heys represent the two feminine aspects of the Partsufim. The two feminine Partsufim we know are Ima and the Nukva. Ima, again, representing Bina, that part of the Mochin, Keser, Chachma, and Bina. So Ima is the Hey Ila'ah, that's the higher Hey, the first Hey of the Shem Hashem. And we're going to see that the second Hey of the Shem Hashem, the Hey Achrona, that is going to represent Malchus, or the Nukva, which we'll get to in a minute. But Hey, the first Hey representing Bina, so if you look at it, it looks exactly like the last Hey, right? Because what does an architect do? The architect draws up the plan, and hopefully, if the plan and the follow through, are going well, so then the house is going to look exactly like the plans, and that's the concept of the Hey. The Hey of Bina is really all 10 spheros, right? A Hey is a Dalid and a Vav together, right? So that which is 10, right? It's all 10 spheros that are there in that Hey, but they're not any more concentrated in their potential sort of form. Now they're in their fully fleshed out potential form. Now they're with all the plans and all the everything is structured and ready to go, again, still in potential. So that's the Hey Ilah, that represents Bina, the architect, the one who is going to make the plans for everything to happen. And that's the Mochins. The Mochin are now, we see, represented by Yud and Hey. And we see this a lot of times in the Sefarim, that the Shem Hashem of Yud and Hey sometimes could represent just Chachma itself, and sometimes it represents Chachma and Bina together, or the Mochin, all three of them together, with the Kutzo Shel Yud. But in the Shem Hashem, the Yud and the Hey of the Shem Hashem represent, again, Erech Anpin in the Kutzo Shel Yud, Chachma or Abba in the Yud itself, and then Hey in the Ima, in the Hey, upper Hey, or the first Hey. Now we move on to Vav, right, in the Shem Hashem. Vav now corresponds to the next parts of down, to Zer Ampin, which are also called as the Shisha Ktsavos, the 6 sides, because there's 6 spheros, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and that's the Vav. Vav is 6, right? So the Vav represents the action, the plan, right? The connector. The Vav is what connects the first Hey and the last Hey, right? That's what the Os Vav does in the Torah. It adds to something, right? So the Vav of the Shem Hashem represents, and it's also, like pulling it down, right? But, starts from the Yud up the top over there, the idea, and it's pulling that Yud all the way down, and that's what a Vav is, right? It's an elongated Yud, because that's what the Vav represents. Zer Ampin, or Tiferes, this parts of represents the bringing down that idea into actuality, actually bringing that idea out from potential to realization. That's Vav, that's the Vav Ktavos, or Zeranpin, or or Tiferes, that's represented by the Vav in the Shem Hashem. And then finally we have Nukva, or Malchus, represented by the Hey Tachtona, the Hey Achrona, because this, we again hope, is going to look exactly like the plans from the architect, and the architectural plans were the 10 spheros, the Dalit and the Vav, structured in a Hey, and we're going to hope that the Nukva is going to come out looking the same as that. So you see, like in the Shem Hashem, right, is merumaz this whole structure, this whole idea of the Ratzon, the idea, the plan, the action, and the actual end result, right? That's all represented by the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. And this is one of a vast number of all different mashalim and metaphors and ways of structuring and understanding these 5 partsufim and how they work together, and how they together all play their own role and represent a part of a whole when it comes to everything. Okay. One more point of introduction, which I'm just going to mention here, very briefly before we move on to another introduction. But there is a sefer that is a lot of people have heard of, especially because of Chabad Chasidus. But there's a sefer called Das, right? Dalit Ayin Taf, Das. And that's Chachma Bina Das is Chabad. So how come I haven't mentioned that yet, or how does that work? So this is a very big topic, and I'm not going to go into it in depth now. It's covered somewhat in the sefer of the Klali Aschalas HaChachma, but the idea is more or less as follows. And this is a very, very a basic way of looking at it. But basically, when we're looking at it from the top down, if we're going to be looking at the 10 spheros and how they are structured from the top down, so to speak, if we're learning in the context of looking from sort of Hashem's perspective, so then we're going to include Keser. Then Keser is where it all begins, and Keser is the first of the 10 spheros. However, if we're looking from the bottom up, if we're talking about the structure of the 10 spheros specifically as it relates to us or how it's coming down to us, so like we said, Keser doesn't really show up. Keser doesn't register. Because Keser has no real revelation over here in this world. However, there's something else called Da'as, which is like the sphera that brings down the mochin to us, right? In other words, because we explained before, there's sort of like the separation, right? There's the mochin, which is all in the head, it's all the concept. So the das is sort of like the spinal cord. It's what like brings it down, or the brainstem, let's say. It's what brings it down into the guf, and brings the mochin to allow them to operate together with the guf. That's called da'as, right? So again, there's only 10 spheros, not 11, not 9. This is, in the beginning of Sefer Tznius, this is exactly what it talks about, this whole idea. We either reckon them as 10 looking from the top with Keser, and we start with Keser, Chachma, and Bina, or we look at it from the bottom, and then we'll say Chachma, Bina, Das. But either way, it's 10, and either way, Chachma, Bina, and Das, or Keser, Chachma, and Bina, it represents the Mochin. Either way, the concept of Chabad represents the Mochin, and the Mochin, how they're coming down to us, but the idea doesn't really change. And that's why there's many times that it'll be referred to in Sfarim as either, Kuf Ches Beis, which is Keser Chachma Bina, referring to the Mochin, or Chabad, Chachma Bina Das, because either way is really referring to the mochin and the concept of the mochin. Again, just depending on the context and what's going on over there will depend whether we're going to deal with Keser as one of the 10 or Das as one of the 10. Okay, but that's an important introduction for what I'm going to explain now. Okay, another way of looking at this structure, another breakup of the structure, is into 3. We have the concept of Chabad, Chagat, Nahim, right? And Nahim, we usually just say as Nahi and leave out the mem. Why? I don't know, but that's just how it's said. So we have a breakup, a structure that we call the Chabad, Chagas, Nahi structure, right? And that's, again, it's really the same thing. We're talking about the whole koma. We're talking about the whole structure of the 10 spheros. We're just relating to them now, again, in another way. We could relate to them, again, like we said, as 10 individuals. We can relate to them as the brains and the body. We can relate to them as the 5 partsufim. So now, introducing another way of relating to them, it's broken up into 3, Chabad, Chagas, Nahi. Okay, and these are, 3 different levels that are going to apply in a whole variety of ways. But let's just try to understand, first of all, when we have the 10 spheros, so we could say that there is, three layers or 3 levels of, of how the spheros are functioning, or where we're talking about in the spheros, right? We have the mochin, right? Chabad, that's like, the most elevated place. That's the highest spiritual place or intellectual place. Then we've got the Chagat, that's like the action place. We have like, that's like the middle. And then the Nahi is like the lowest place. The Nahi would be like, the place where it's, like connected to the ground, right? Like, let's say in the guf of a person, right? In the body of a person. Well, let me take a step back. Okay, so it's a very important concept in Torah in general, right? This idea of kol ma sheyesh b'klal yesh b'prat, kol ma sheyesh b'prat yesh b'klal. what everything that is and repeats itself in many, many different ways. There's nothing that just exists on its own without a context and without a relationship to everything else. And whatever we see operating on a big level or on a certain abstract conceptual level is going to operate on every other level as well at the same time. And I'll explain to you what this means. But the lashon that Rav Moshe David Vali uses for this, yeah, he says, "Ein beprat el mashe b'chlal." In every prat you've got the whole klal, and in every klal you have the whole prat. Now, what does that mean? That means, let's take the 10 spheros. Okay, so we have 10 spheros: Keser, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Word, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, Malchus. Right? Um, what are those? Where are those? What are we talking about over here? So the answer is everything, right? The answer is that Hashem originally, when He structured the world, He structured the entire universe on a template, on a paradigm that is based on this structure. It means that every one of the four olamos of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which maybe we'll get to understanding, those also correspond to the different partsufim of Abba, Ima, Zer Anpin, and Nuk. That's the same thing. The Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, those are also based on a template of each olam has 10 spheros in it. Not only that, but each sphera has 10 spheros in it, and each partsuf has 10 spheros in it, and each partsuf has 5 partsufim in it, and each partsuf of each partsuf has another 5 partsufim in it. So it goes ad infinitum. That means that we have keser. Let's just take chachma. So we have, in one sense, we could talk about chachma in general, but then we can also talk about within chachma the midah of the mochin of chachma, as opposed to the zayin tachtonim of chachma. Or within chachma, we could talk about the parts of Ima within the parts of Abba. Right? Everything has a kol mash yesh b'chlal yesh b'prat. Or let's say we're talking about now that we're breaking up the 10 spheros into a Chabad Chagas Nahi system, which is like a 3 system. Well, each one of those has within it also another Chabad Chagas Nahi, and each one of those has within it also another Chabad Chagas Nahi. So every system that we're talking about over here, it's like a fractal, absolutely, exactly a fractal. It repeats itself, and repeats itself, and repeats itself, always on different layers and different levels and different orders of magnitude, right? But the same structure and the same concepts, and again, chesed and din and rachamim in the middle, all of these things run through everything. So when we're talking about the Eser Spheros, we're talking about me and everything that's a part of me, and we're also talking about every midah within me has its own Eser Spheros. That are that, and every part of my body corresponds to a different part of the Eser Spheros, and within every part of my body there's another Eser Spheros. So that's a very, very important idea to understand, that the anything we're talking about in a big scale we can apply to a small scale, because what we're going to see is that almost everything we're going to talk about when we start to get into Pesach itself and the kavanos of Pesach and what's going on, we're going to be focusing specifically on Zer Anpin. We're going to be focusing almost all of the action, let's say, of what's happening on Pesach is the growth and the movement of the partsuf of Zer Anpin. And we're going to be discussing how Zer Anpin is interacting or gaining or growing based on the other partsufim, but it's all going to be within that parts of Zera Ampin, and not talking about the whole structure as a whole, as we're going to see as we go along. Okay, so keeping this in mind, let's go back to this idea that I introduced, right? That we could break up everything into a Chabad Chagas Nahi system, and now let's see where we see that. Where do we see that in the Klal, and where do we see that in the Prat? So let's take the Gufa Adam, right? Let's just take a person, like we've alluded to this a number of times, right? So the mochin are like the brains, right? And this is, if you look in there's a tefillah, Pasach Eliyahu, I think it's like in the Sfard Sidurim, it's not in Ashkenaz, but it's a very famous tefillah, you can look it up, Pasach Eliyahu. And it goes through the whole guf, it goes through the body and the different parts of the body that correspond. Also in the sefer Klali Askalas Chachma, he has a whole number of charts about all of this and clearly explains this. That so the mochin, that's the Chabad, that's going to refer to the intellectual part of a person. The Chagat, right, that's the middle level, right, that's like the trunk and the arms of a person. So that's going to refer to their their more um, uh, not physical midos, because we'll see that's going to be more in the nahi, let's say like the emotional parts of the person as opposed to the intellectual parts of the person, right? And then the nahi, the lower part, that's like the legs and the reproductive organs. The nahi, that's going to be like the base parts of a person, like the person's, taivas, for example, right? You can have a relationship with a person, right? You can have a zivug, a relationship with a person, and there could be on three different levels. There could be, a good relationship has all three, right? But you can have a connection on a physical level, so that we would call like a connection on a nahi level, right? I don't have anything to share with this person intellectually. I have nothing to share with this person spiritually or anything, right? But we find each other very attractive, right? So that's what that would be called a nahi level, right? Because that's on the lowest level, right? Then you could have an intellectual, or let's say not like an emotional, like a heart connection, an emotional connections. That would be, let's say, on the chagat level, and then you could have like in a spiritual, intellectual collection and the connection that would be on the Chabad level, right? You have all of these layers, all of these exist in all different facets. Now, another example, let's say with generations, right? We could look at our generation as the Chagat, right? The generation before us, right, as like the Chabad, right? That's like where we came from, and the next generation is our Nahi, like that's where we're going to, right? That's like almost chronologically, sort of what was before us and now and what's coming later. Uh, Additionally, we could see it as the way of a Rebbe and a Talmud could be the same idea, right? My mochin I get from my Rebbe, right? So the Chabad is like my Rebbe. That's where like what I've gotten from him. The Hagat, that's me, myself, my own Torah. The Nahi, right, is my students, right? My Nahi is the students, the people who learn from me. Now with this, we're going to understand something very interesting, right? Because if my students are my Nahi, right? So that means that my Rebbe's students are his Nahi also. And if I'm his student, so that makes me his Nahi, right? So what does that mean? So that means exactly this, right? All the Partsufim, right? One feeds into the other. They're all connected. They're not just one here and one here and one here and one here. They're all interconnected. And the lashon that is used is that the tachton of the elyon becomes the elyon of the tachton, right? The nahi of the elyon becomes the chabad of the tachton, right? If you picture that, right, the netzach hod yesod, right, sort of like the nahi, that those three, right, go onto the next layer, right? So that becomes the chachma, bina, and das, right, of those three of the next level down, right? That's the mochin of the next generation, or the next layer. And then the same thing, my nahi becomes my students mochin, right? And because it's always the tachton of the elyon becomes the elyon of the tachton, and that's a very important idea to remember, because we're going to be seeing this a lot when it comes to Pesach and what happens over there, right? That and if you think about that another way, the elyon of the tachton becomes the tachton of the elyon, right? Meaning every time a person grows, right, there's a certain point where when they've reached what they can grow at this stage, and they move on to another stage. But at that stage, they're at the lowest, right? If you have a kid who graduates from mesifta, from cheder, he was the top kid in cheder, so now he gets into the best mesifta, right? But when he gets to the best mesifta, he's the lowest grade, right? So you would say he went, he achieved sort of the level of Chabad. He moved himself up from the idea of mesifta. He was mashlim. I'm sorry, from the idea of cheder, and now that he reaches that level, he becomes the lowest of the next stage, right? Obviously, he's on a much higher level, right? Because now he's in the next stage. He's not where he was. However, it feels like a yerida. It feels like he's at the bottom again, right? It's not a nice feeling to be the new kid in the yeshiva. Then, of course, a person builds themselves up again, and then again, there's being at the next stage is being at the bottom of a higher level. So that's always the way that it works, right? Like my Rebbe's nahi, right, is my Chabad, right? Because what are my mochin? What do I know is only what I got from my Rebbe, right? My Rebbe's Chagat, I can't get there at all. That's beyond me, right? If I grow and I turn into my Rebbe, if I grow to that level and that stage, then I can have the same mochin as him, right? I can grow to that level. But as his Talmud, right, is my Chabad is going to be his nahi, right? That's how it's going to work, right? So you understand that these three layers, these three levels, right? Again, with the Chabad being the most Penimiyus, the Chagat being in the middle, and the Nahi being Chitzoni, right? There's all different ways of putting this, right? All different ways of structuring this. Another way of looking at it is that this is the way of Gidul. This is the way that something grows, sort of chronologically. Meaning, let's just take a partzuf. We're going to take the partzuf of Zera Anpin. Okay, so within the partzuf of Zera Anpin, right? So now we have a whole structure now of Zera Anpin. We have a Chabad Chagas Nahi of Zera Anpin. So we can have Zera Anpin operating on the level of Nahi, which would mean that Zera Anpin is in a stage of Katnus. He's in a small place. He's not in a big place, right? Or he could be in a stage of Chagat, which is on a higher level, or he could be in a stage of Chabad, and that would be Shalem, right? Within each partzuf, there is three levels of Chabad Chagas Nahi, which give a person, or whatever the concept is, the opportunity to be mashlim that level, to fill up that level. And again, what does filling it up mean? Now that we're understanding him, it means drawing mochin from a higher place, right? If I'm able to pull down mochin, if I'm able to draw mochin from a higher place, that means that I'm pulling myself up to get there. If the nahi of a higher place is coming into my chabad, that means that I'm allowing myself to get there, and I'm pulling myself up in order to be able to be over there. Okay, so I hope this is clear, this idea, because what we're going to see now when it comes to Pesach is the following, and we're going to start now, hopefully understanding a little bit about the story arc of Pesach and Yetzias Mitzrayim. When Klal Yisrael were in Mitzrayim, we were in a stage of or Zer Ampin, right? Well, that's what we're talking about. This is what was happening in Shemayim. It was represented over here in the physical world by Klal Yisrael being enslaved and being deep, heavy under the thumb of the Mitzrim and Paro, right? But what that was represented by in Shemayim was that Zer Anpin, right? This parts of Zer Anpin did not have any expression at all. He was not even operating on the level of Nahi. He had no expression at all. That we call him that is as if he was an uber b'me'ei imo, as if he was back in ima, that he was not even born yet. Right? That's a state of complete and total darkness without any expression at all. There's a teeny bit of mochin that is there, that just to keep the uber alive, right? But a baby has no expression whatsoever of mochin, and therefore Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim was a completely and totally cut off from the mochin in a spiritual way. They were totally under the klipa of Mitzrayim, and in a state of complete and total sort of darkness. Now, there are stages of growth, just like a baby has a stage of growth, right? Once a baby is born, so in the beginning, the baby has to nurse. The baby can't really do anything on its own. It can't, take food in and take the nourishment out of the food and leave behind the waste. It just can't do that. It has to take food that his mother already did that for him, right? So that's like a stage of katnus, a stage of of being small. Again, there's already mochin that are there. There's already some brain activity that's going on, right? But Chazal say until a kid is able to call Abba and Ima, right, which is obviously a reference to all of this, until a kid is able to discern who his father and mother are and call them by name, and according to another opinion, until a person is able to eat chita, which the idea is that they're able to be mevarer now, their brain is working enough that they can start to work over here in Olam Hazeh. So that's we call katnus Rishon. We call Katnus Rishon the first 13 years, or 12 for a woman, the first 13 years of a man's life. The stage of Katnus, the stage of being small, and this is like the stage of Nahi. This is like the stage of Katnus Hamochin, a very, very low level of Mochin that a person has up until the age of 13. Once a person hits the age of 13, we call that Gadlus Rishon. A person hits a certain stage of gadlus, his mochin are coming into form now, his mitzvos are now meaningful, and we view that as having left the stage of katnus rishon, right? He's reached now a stage of gadlus rishon, we call it, but gadlus rishon is really katnus sheni. right? Because we just explained, right? Once you reach the level here, the highest level, so then you're already now at the lowest level of the next stage. So the next stage, what we call a gadol, right? Gadlus rishon is really we call also katnus sheni. And what's katnus sheni? That's a person from 13 years old onwards until 20 years old and onwards. When a person is developing their mochin, a person is developing their intellect and developing their mind. And a person has the ability to then reach a stage of gadlus sheni. What's gadlus sheni? That's an adam gadol. That's a person who fulfills himself, right? Olam hazeh is like that stage of the chagat, right? Like the middle stage where we're working and we have the ability to fulfill ourselves completely. Gadlus shlishi, that's already a stage that has to come from Mashiach and from Hashem. That is not achievable for us over here. That's like Adam Rishon Kodem Achet, when people are going to be completely different than we are right now. But that's when there's a complete gadlus of Zera Ampin. It would be, in his full state, right? But in the meantime, we have these two stages really, two of Katnus Rishon, Gadlus Rishon that really feeds into Katnus Sheni to Gadlus Sheni, and then Gadlus, Katnus and Gadlus Shlishi, which is a much higher level. This is also corresponds to the world and the way that the world is structured and what's going on, right? Where we live right now, we're in a stage of Katnus in the world, Katnus Rishon, Godless with the stage of working towards Godless Rishon, but Katnus Sheni already is going to be a stage of Nisim, a stage where we're going to be able to see Hashem and be able to, everything will be much clearer to us, right? But right now we're in a stage of Katnus. The world is in a state of Katnus, and we don't get to see things. Clearly, everything is with Hester Panim, and that's the state that we're in. But during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and certainly when it came to Yetzias Mitzrayim, which we're going to get to right now, it was not like that, and the world was in a much more mitukan place. Now, the Chag of Pesach, right? What happens by Pesach, the first night of Pesach, is this whole story happens automatically as a freebie. Right, Hashem took Klal Yisrael. We were on the Mem Tes Shari Tumah. Right, we were in the state of mamish like an Uber b'mei imo, in a complete choshech and a darkness place, and Hashem pulled us all the way up to a place of Gadlus, all the way up through Katnus Rishon, through Gadlus Rishon, through Katnus Sheni to Gadlus Sheni. Hashem pulled us all the way up there, skipping all the intermediate steps, right? Which is why there was a big sakana, because when a person skips steps, right, so then the sitra achra, the forces of negativity, have the ability to latch on to the what the person is not able to handle, and that's what pulls a person down. But on Pesach night, Hashem gave us a leil shimurim, a certain shmira, that is, if we eat the matzah and we do what we're supposed to do, so that Hashem pulled Klal Yisrael all the way down from the depths, all the way up to this really, really, really high place. Total freebie, total out of chesed. We didn't deserve it. It was an absolute chesed from Hashem that elevated us up to this place. We were able to enjoy and bask in that gadlus for a day. And by the second day of Pesach, right, all of that was gone. And now they had to work themselves through the Omer. The Omer, the whole process of the 7 weeks of Sfiras HaOmer, is all just to do what we get Leil Pesach for free, spiritually speaking, right? Leil Pesach for free, we shoot all the way up there. We go right up to the level that we could deserve Maimed Har Sinai, right? And then Hashem drops us all the way down, and now we have to work our way up. We have to, go through the whole process of Sfiras HaOmer in order to get there again. But this is the Chag of Pesach. This is the great nace of Geulas Mitzrayim, that Hashem selected us from among the Mitzrim, even though there was no difference, there was no reason that we had in order to do it. Hashem selected us and pulled us up to this extremely high level, gave us mochin on an extraordinarily high level that under normal circumstances, if a person would have that, it would ruin them because they can't handle it. But in this case, we were able to jump. That's why the Yontif is called Pesach, right? Because it's all about this jumping, this aliyah that a person has. And okay, so Amir Hashem, I'm hoping that we're going to record another shiur to go through some of the mitzvos and the Leil Seder and some of the kavanos, specifically of how it all fits into this structure. But I wanted to just at least get this out, this idea that to understand what the context of Pesach is, again, of course, the history of leaving Mitzrayim and all of that is historical, and it happened, and it's important, right? But we have to realize that everything that's happening here is just a manifestation of what's really going on in Shemayim, and during this time period, that every year, Hashem brings that same Shefa out every year, and Ramchal says this explicitly, on Leil Pesach, to be aware of what's going on a little bit inside of us, and realize that even though we don't feel it necessarily, don't realize this is happening, but Hashem is elevating us to an incredibly, incredibly high level. And okay, Mir Hashem, next time we'll be able to talk about the mitzvahs more specifically, and how each part of the seder, of the avoda of the seder of the night, feeds into this whole idea of growth.